Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my colleague, senior wealth reporter John Hyatt. John, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
You were reporting that you met with Vivek Ramaswamy back in August, and the circumstances surrounding the GOP presidential contender then are way different than they are now as we sit here in the beginning of November. Can you break that down for us?
When I met with Vivek in August, it was 36 hours after his first debate performance, during which he was the breakout star. He was the most talked about candidate. Folks like Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Nikki Haley were going after him, and he sort of owned the spotlight, and we saw that in his poll numbers. He was surging. He was on the up. There was a lot of chatter about him being a potential vice president for Donald Trump, and he was really sort of enjoying that moment. Flash forward a couple months, and things have taken a bit of a turn for Vivek. He's still in the top four when it comes to GOP primary polling, but he's definitely lost his share of the vote. Nikki Haley, somebody who he's sparred with a lot on the debate stage, has overtaken him in that third place behind Ron DeSantis and, of course, the frontrunner Donald Trump. And yeah, Vivek is sort of fighting to sort of stay in it.
You're reporting, as you said, his stance in the polls have dropped. Also, his net worth has dropped. So let's first talk about the polls. You mentioned his sparring partner, Nikki Haley. They got into it pretty intensely on the debate stage last night, resulting in Nikki Haley calling him scum. I just talked to a Republican strategist, and while we were talking about Vivek Ramaswamy, we said you could call him a lot of things. Likeable might not be one of them. He might not be someone voters really want to grab a beer with, as the saying goes. So can you explain that drop in the polls a little bit?
Yeah. So in August, right after that first debate, according to 538's aggregator of national polls, which looks at how the GOP primary candidates are polling, he was around 12 or 13%, just behind Ron DeSantis, around 14%. So he was, on the rise. It looked like he was in prime position to supplant Ron DeSantis as, second to Donald Trump. Flash forward to today, Nikki Haley is now in that spot, threatening to overtake Ron DeSantis, and Vivek has fallen to about 5%. So that's over 50% decline for Vivek, from 12, 13% to just over 5% today. And as far as his net worth goes, you're right, like it's gone down, but not if it on a apples to apples basis. His net worth has declined less than his poll numbers. So his net worth peaked at about $1.1 billion in September, and now it's closer to $900 million. We peg him right at about $880 million as of yesterday.
So he was in the Billionaires Club with a B, now the Multi-Millionaires Club with an M. What can you pinpoint as the reason as his net worth dropping?
Really one reason, and that is Roivant Sciences. It's the biotech company that Vivek founded and retains a large stake in. So Roivant is publicly traded, and its stock has fallen about 30% since peaking in late September. So really, we have his other assets at about the same as they were. We have about a $220 million investment portfolio of other stocks and bonds, which we viewed through his financial disclosure that he filed with the FEC. He has a approximately $150 million stake in Strive Asset Management. That's the anti-woke index fund provider that he founded last year. So those assets are about the same per Forbes calculations. But since Roivant is publicly traded, we can measure how large his stake is just based on the stock price. And that 30% dip in the stock price has shed about $200 million off of his net worth.
Forbes actually compiled the net worths of all of the 2024 presidential contenders. So how does Vivek Ramaswamy specifically stand up and stack up compared to the other candidates?
Well, Vivek can rest assured that even as his poll numbers are on the decline and his sparring partner Nikki Haley has overtaken him, he remains vastly wealthier than Nikki Haley and the rest of the presidential field, for that matter, barring Donald Trump, of course. Trump is the wealthiest candidate by far. We have him at a $2.6 billion net worth. That figure has been on the decline, but it's still, by and away, the largest among presidential candidates. Vivek comes in second with that $880 million net worth. And, the next closest is Doug Burgum, North Dakota's governor. We have him at over $100 million. Even, that considerable fortune is less than 1/8 of what Vivek has. And then with folks like Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis, they're all under $20 million.
What's really interesting is, as we know, Donald Trump is by far the richest contender. He also famously does not dip into his own pockets to fund his own campaign. But you're reporting that Vivek does self-fund. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we see through FEC disclosures that Vivek has lent his campaign $15.25 million. So all told, he's contributed about $16 million to his campaign, funding basic operating expenses like jetting from state to state, other campaign costs. He's gotten a lot of traction with small donors too, as well as some big donors. But yeah, Vivek has put in about $16 million of his own money so far, as per the most recent FEC disclosures. What will be interesting in the months ahead is to see whether, one, Vivek injects more of his own money into his campaign. How long does he want to keep self-funding? And two, whether he forgives his own loans to his campaign or not. These are different than just pumping $16 million of cash into his campaign. He could forgive $15.25 million of that loan he made to his campaign with outside contributors' money. So it'll be interesting to see what measure he takes there.
Yeah, I noticed and I wrote down that you used the word he lent his campaign. So is it normal for people to loan their campaign money and then pay themselves back using donor funds?
Well, typically with politicians, they're not billionaire businessmen like Vivek Ramaswamy. So I think, often if they lend their campaign money, it's, more to help get things off the ground if they have those resources, of course. You look at somebody like Ron DeSantis, we have his net worth at $1.5 million, and that's just from, recent book sales over the last couple of years. So, a typical politician like Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, Joe Biden, they don't have hundreds of millions of dollars laying around that they can lend to their campaigns to help springboard interest among voters. They really rely on small dollar donors, but also, corporations funding their super PACs and, high dollar donors, billionaires who, back prominent politicians. So I think we don't have that much precedent to draw from just because Vivek is sort of an unusual politician, more in the mold of a Donald Trump than what you typically see.
I do want to talk about his finances looking forward. He was, as you said, a billionaire, according to Forbes. He then slid down to about $880 million. I mean, that's nothing to cry over because that's still just a vast amount of money. But do you think that he will join the billionaire club once again?
Well, if the stock analysts of Roivant are to be believed, then yes, he will. There are about 10 analysts covering Roivant, and 9 of them have a buy on the stock. One has a hold. Shares were trading at about $9 yesterday, and the average price that these analysts have for Roivant's stock, their target price, is over $16 a share. So, if that were to be the case, then yes, he would be comfortably a billionaire if the stock can regain some ground that it's lost over the last couple months. It will depend on the company's pipeline of drugs. So Roivant's business model is to buy up promising drug candidates that have been discarded by large pharmaceutical firms and to try to bring those drugs to market. Counterintuitively, one of the reasons Roivant's stock has dipped of late is because it sold one of its most promising drugs to Swiss pharma giant Roche in a $7.1 billion deal. Now you might think, well, that's great for Roivant. They're getting, 7 billion plus in cash. That should, help its outlook. But, the analyst I spoke with yesterday told me about how the anticipated success of this drug, which treats irritable bowel syndrome, was already factored into Roivant's high valuation, and that investors really thought it was going to be a driver of long-term cash flow for the company. Instead, you get this kind of one-time hit with a big $7 billion infusion, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be part of Roivant's portfolio for a long time because they're divesting it. So, there are a few other candidates that Roivant has in its pipeline, but they're long-term time horizon type drugs. And they're also engaged in litigation over patents around mRNA used in COVID vaccines. So if that litigation goes Roivant's way, that could potentially also provide a financial boon. But again, that's a litigation is a multi-year process. So it could be a bit before Roivant's stock climbs back to the prices needed to vault Vivek into the billionaire ranks. But equity markets can be unpredictable too, so it could be sooner than that as well.
John, you're in a really interesting position. You've reported on and covered Vivek Ramaswamy, the businessman, the entrepreneur. You also joined him on the campaign trail, both in New Hampshire and Iowa. So do you think, pertaining to Vivek Ramaswamy, there's anything important to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think that even if Vivek's campaign ultimately doesn't result in the outcome he wants, and he's drops out, or it's deemed not a success by the media, I think that he still will have accomplished a lot by running for president. He's become a household name. He's introduced his business, Strive Asset Management, to thousands of voters and diners in New Hampshire and Iowa and across the country. He's sort of become part of the Republican firmament now in this sort of weird Trump era that we're living in. And, he has a long future ahead of him. He's only 38 years old. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him running for president or, running for other office again in the future.
John Hyatt, I appreciate your reporting. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.